President Trump's trying to play a very weak hand right now. And the Russians have been, I think, extraordinarily gracious in not holding the president to account for the failures of diplomatic norm, for the failures of common sense, for the failures of decency. The president, on the one hand, will articulate repeatedly how he understands that Russia didn't start this conflict. He understands how this conflict came about. It's about the expansion of NATO, which Russia took umbrage to, and the president said that Russia had every right. Then Marco Rubio turns around and says, rightly so, that this is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. I'll say that one more time: a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Ukraine is simply the tool for this. If you have that kind of comprehension, then why are you playing the game as if Ukraine has a say in anything that's going on here? Why are you paying attention to the Ukrainian positions that they must return the borders to 2014, 2022, that Russia must pay reparations? There's just an absolute inconsistency in the president's approach here. And while I don't want to predict the future, I will say that it will fail because this is an existential issue for Russia, and this is amateur hour in the extreme to think that presenting a document signed by Marco Rubio and Volodymyr Zelensky is going to somehow twist the arm of a Russian president who's been at war for 3 years, who has taken the personal responsibility of the deaths of tens of thousands of his soldiers, who is the leader of his nation, is somehow going to throw that all away because Marco Rubio signed a damn piece of paper along with Zelensky. This is insanity. I'm surprised Witkoff went along with it, because
how can the Russians,
again, this is me speaking. I can't speak on behalf of the Russians, no matter how much the FBI thinks I do. When you look at the words of the senior Russians, they acknowledge that the Trump administration is seeking to move the relationship in a direction that the relationship should be in. That is one where diplomacy is reestablished, where diplomatic norms are recognized, and therefore the Russians are able and willing to differentiate between the sins of the past and the actions of the present. And I think this is an accurate point. And no matter what we think of the Trump administration, good, bad, ugly, pretty, whatever, we do need to acknowledge that this is a distinct departure from past practice, that this is a different administration, that this administration wasn't in power in February of 2022, that this administration did not create the proxy conflict that's ongoing since February 2022, that this administration is not responsible for arming, for targeting, for directing the assaults undertaken by Ukraine against Russian territory, that this administration seeks peace. So the Russians are willing to overlook a lot of hiccups, stumbles, foibles, mistakes, because they think that this is the better direction to be headed in. But there's going to be only so much tolerance for incompetence. And at some point in time, if this incompetence seeks to strong arm Russia into doing something that's against Russian national interests, the Russians are going to say, "Niet." The Shin Bet has several investigations underway against Netanyahu. There is, of course, the years-old corruption investigation that Netanyahu has been working very hard to shape the judicial system so that he would never stand trial. And then there are a series of ongoing investigations related to October 7th and Netanyahu's actions in the aftermath of the initiation of this conflict by Hamas, the failures of leadership that took place. But I think more critically is the one that hardly anybody's talking about. Seymour Hersh has written about it extensively, and that is the absolute violation of law and breach of national security used by Netanyahu in an effort to shape a very politicized argument about the hostages. It was causing him a tremendous amount of political harm. to shape that argument in a way that was favorable to him, but in absolute departure from the facts. He misrepresented a document whose secrecy was such that it was kept locked up in a room. Nobody was supposed to acknowledge its existence. He not only revealed its existence, but took the contents of this document and deliberately misrepresented it to spin it as if Hamas was the one responsible for sabotaging a hostage release deal, when in fact it was him all along. And he is now under investigation for lying to the Israeli people and for violating national security by leaking a document he had no authority to leak.
The segment begins with Judge Napolitano introducing the show, focusing on the Trump administration's actions in Yemen. ScottRitter joins to critique an alleged diplomatic effort where Steve Witkoff delivered a ceasefire agreement signed by Marco Rubio and Volodymyr Zelensky to Vladimir Putin, arguing it's a flawed attempt to pressure Russia. Ritter notes Trump's inconsistent Ukraine policy, recognizing NATO's role yet pushing unrealistic demands, and praises Russia's patience with these missteps. The discussion shifts to Israel, where Ritter examines Netanyahu's plan to fire the Shin Bet head amid investigations into corruption and security breaches, warning of a societal divide risking civil conflict. Takeaway: U.S.-Russia diplomacy critique. Unconventional and ineffective tactic. Ritter scrutinizes the reported delivery of a Rubio-Zelensky ceasefire document to Putin, labeling it a significant deviation from standard diplomatic practices. He argues that this move implies an attempt to strong-arm Russia into accepting terms that are fundamentally unacceptable given Russia's deep-seated interests in the Ukraine conflict. This approach, he suggests, betrays a lack of understanding of Russia's resolve and the gravity of the situation, rendering it unlikely to succeed against a leader who has weathered years of war. Trump's contradictory stance. Ritter points out that Trump has publicly acknowledged NATO expansion as a legitimate grievance for Russia, a factor that fueled the Ukraine conflict's escalation. However, he finds it perplexing and inconsistent that the administration continues to entertain Ukrainian demands, such as restoring 2014 borders and securing reparations, that defy this understanding. This contradiction, Ritter asserts, undermines any coherent strategy and signals a weak negotiating position, likely to collapse under the pressure of its own incongruity in Russia's firm stance. Russian patience. Despite these diplomatic blunders, Ritter commends Russia's leadership, particularly Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, for their extraordinary patience. He suggests they are tolerating what he calls amateur hour tactics because they perceive Trump's administration as distinct from its predecessors, offering a potential shift toward re-establishing diplomatic norms. This leniency, however, is not infinite, and Ritter warns that continued incompetence could erode this goodwill, pushing Russia to reject further engagement. Implication for U.S. credibility. Ritter emphasizes that the U.S. cannot position itself as an honest broker in this proxy war, given its role as the principal belligerent through instigation, provocation, and financial support. This compromised status, combined with the absurdity of thinking Putin would capitulate to a document signed by Rubio and Zelensky after 3 years of war and tens of thousands of Russian casualties, underscores the futility of the approach. Ritter's takeaway is a stark warning. Such tactics not only fail to influence Russia but also expose the U.S. as out of its depth in handling an existential conflict for its adversary, potentially damaging its global standing. Israeli instability. Netanyahu's desperate maneuver. Ritter delves into Netanyahu's announcement to fire the Shin Bet head, framing it as a desperate bid to quash multiple investigations threatening his leadership. He details the long-standing corruption probe that Netanyahu has sought to evade by manipulating the judicial system, alongside newer inquiries into his handling of the October 7 Hamas attack and a significant national security breach. This breach involves Netanyahu leaking and misrepresenting a highly classified document to deflect blame over a failed hostage deal, an act Ritter sees as a blatant violation of law and a politicized gambit to salvage his image amid mounting political pressure. One deepening societal divide. Ritter echoes Alastair Crooke's observation of a profound schism within Israeli society, pitting religious nationalists, like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who lean on Old Testament justifications, against liberal Democrats advocating equal rights and true democracy. He argues this divide is not merely ideological but structural, creating unbridgeable gaps that threaten national cohesion. The lack of a clear path to reconciliation amplifies the risk of escalation, as both sides grow increasingly entrenched in their visions for Israel's future. Civil war on the horizon. Ritter recalls the pre-October 7, 2023, protests where hundreds of thousands demanded Netanyahu's resignation over judicial reforms, with reserve pilots vowing not to fly and the Israeli president warning of a real civil war. He asserts that subsequent events, war with Hamas, governance failures, and ongoing strife, have only widened these fractures. The prospect of Jews killing Jews in the Holy Land emerges as a chilling possibility, driven by Netanyahu's polarizing leadership and refusal to yield to accountability, which Ritter sees as a catalyst for potential armed conflict. Implication for stability. The takeaway here is a grim prognosis. Netanyahu's self-preservation tactics, particularly his clash with Shin Bet, are accelerating Israel's descent into chaos. Ritter suggests that by targeting a key security figure amid active investigations, Netanyahu risks alienating critical institutions and fueling armed conflict between his supporters and opponents. This internal turmoil, Ritter warns, could destabilize Israel at a time when it faces external threats, creating a volatile mix with broader regional implications that could ripple across the Middle East.
Well, I mean, first of all, the American people need to know that the Houthi of Yemen have been in war with the America via proxy since 2014. The Saudi Arabian Air Force, using aircraft provided by the United States of America, dropping bombs provided by the United States of America, bombs targeted by the intelligence provided by the United States of America, have been pummeling Yemen for a decade. And Yemen hasn't blinked. The United States got involved in, participating in these attacks last year, or even for over a year now. We've been in a quasi war with the Houthi, because the Houthi are very principled people, and they said, we will not stand by idly while genocide is taking place. The Palestinian people of Gaza must be allowed access to humanitarian goods. The blockade must be lifted, and until which time those conditions are met, we will prevent Israeli shipping from transiting through the Red Sea into the port of Eilat. And they succeeded in shutting down the shipping. The port went bankrupt. The Israeli economy was devastated. Now, this is a Houthi action against the Israelis, and America stuck its nose in it. And then America said, no, you can't do this. You have to cease your blockade. And the Houthi said, stick it in your ear. And we started bombing them. Terrible bombs, according to Trump. I mean, my God, what? Because Donald Trump ordered a bomb, it blows up with greater explosive force than the bomb that was dropped under Biden. Trump is an idiot. I hate to say that, and my wife is going to be very mad at me for saying this, but this is the kind of stupidity that a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said, Mr. President, stop. Cease and desist. The Secretary of Defense has to do an intervention, say, please don't do this. You are making us look stupid. You're putting us in a bad situation, and it's unbecoming of the Commander-in-Chief to speak in this fashion about conflict when American lives are on the line. Treat the Americans with respect, at least. Use words that impart the dignity of the service they are giving you instead of treating it like a childish video game. Mr. President, shut up, and that's what he needs to do. Shut up. If you're going to drop bombs, but quit pretending that because you're Donald Trump, the earth shakes greater because you dropped the damn bomb than somebody else. The bomb blows up, and you know who doesn't care? The Houthi. They don't give a damn, Mr. President. They're going to kick your ass just like they kicked everybody's ass because you can't follow through. All you can do is drop bombs, and your bombs won't stop them from firing missiles. And then you want to now threaten the Iranian people the same way. It isn't going to work, Mr. President. And what's going to happen are one of two things. One, you're going to look foolish because you're going to have to back down when your Secretary of Defense says, we can't escalate any further without putting 700,000 boots on the ground. That's a major invasion that will cause the entire region to blow up. Oil prices will spin out of control and your economy will crash, and you're finished, Mr. President. You're done. Everything you're trying to do, the American people will not tolerate $120 oil because they can't economically. All the changes you're making are predicated upon a foundation of economic stability, which will not be here if you throw oil security, energy security out the window by going to war with Iran. Stop it. Or he will actually go to war, thinking that somehow American bombs ordered by Donald Trump take on some sort of angelic property and blow up with greater violence and more terror than any other bomb ever made. And then the Iranians will shut down the Strait of Hormuz, blow up American installations, destroy Israel, and invite an American nuclear retaliation. And boom, the man who thought he was going to get the Nobel Peace Prize will go down in history as the greatest warmonger in modern history. The president should have sent Steve Witkoff to Benjamin Netanyahu, punch Netanyahu in the nose, headbutt him in the face, put him in the chair, and say, lift the blockade against Gaza right now. You're done. You're finished. Stop the blockade. Get the humanitarian goods blowing back in. That's what should have happened. But no, we can't say no to the Israelis, apparently, or the president just isn't smart enough to realize the ramifications of what Netanyahu did, not realizing that the Houthi linked. The reason why the Houthi stopped firing their missiles last time is that the ceasefire came in as they demanded, and the humanitarian goods flow, and the Houthi were people of their word, and they said, we're done. But no, they allowed it to happen again. Mr. President, you can't bomb these people into submission. There's a video of a Houthi fighter going out to recover the body of his friend. The man's wearing sandals. He's got his little dish dash on, not body armor. He's not dressed like an American commando and all this kind of stuff. And he's running with his body through enemy fire. You see the bullets kicking all around him. They're trying to get, and he keeps running in the desert under fire with a body on his shoulders, and he recovers his friend. That's who we're fighting. We can make fun of them. We can use all the derogatory terms we want. They wear sandals. They do this. They do that. They do this. They're the toughest people in the world when it comes to fighting in that area of the world, and we are not going to beat them.
This segment opens with Napolitano reading Trump's tweet threatening the Houthis and Iran, prompting Ritter to question the morality and efficacy of U.S. airstrikes in Yemen. Ritter provides a decade-long context of U.S.-backed Saudi bombing, framing the Houthis' Red Sea actions as a response to Israel's Gaza blockade. He denounces Trump's escalation as foolish, highlighting the Houthis' resilience, indigenous capabilities, and defiance, including their strike on the USS Harry Truman. Ritter warns of catastrophic risks, like war with Iran, and advocates pressuring Israel to lift the Gaza blockade as a simpler solution. He concludes by lamenting lost Houthi communication due to sanctions, urging a more informed policy. Takeaways. Trump's Yemen policy critique. Moral and legal quandary. Ritter asserts that the U.S. killing of Yemeni civilians under Trump's orders could be legally argued as terrorism in any court claiming jurisdiction, drawing a parallel to Israeli actions in Gaza. This provocative stance challenges the ethical grounding of the airstrikes, suggesting they place the U.S. on a slippery slope of accountability akin to its criticisms of adversaries, raising questions about consistency in international norms and the potential for legal repercussions. Historical context of conflict. He provides a robust history, noting that since 2014, the Houthis have faced relentless bombing by the Saudi Air Force, armed and guided by U.S. resources, without yielding. Ritter frames their current Red Sea campaign, disrupting Israeli shipping to bankrupt the port of Eilat, as a direct response to Israel's blockade of humanitarian goods into Gaza, a cause they've upheld for over a year with devastating economic impact on Israel. This context underscores the Houthis' endurance and strategic intent, which the U.S. has now escalated against, ignoring a decade of evidence that such tactics fail. Trump's misguided escalation. Ritter unleashes a scathing critique of Trump's bombastic tweet and bombing campaign, calling him an idiot and urging him to shut up. He argues that Trump's belief in the exceptional power of his ordered bombs is delusional. The Houthis, unmoved by a decade of airstrikes, won't be cowed now. Ritter suggests this reflects a childish, video game-like approach unfit for a commander-in-chief, disrespecting American troops and ignoring the conflict's realities, a stance he imagines military leaders like the Joint Chiefs would implore Trump to abandon, highlighting a disconnect between rhetoric and battlefield outcomes. Catastrophic risks. Ritter outlines two dire paths: either Trump backs down when escalation proves unsustainable, requiring 700,000 troops and spiking oil prices to $120 per barrel, crashing the economy, or he persists, triggering war with Iran. In the latter, Iran could shut the Strait of Hormuz, destroy U.S. bases and Israel, and provoke a nuclear response, transforming Trump from a peace prize hopeful into history's greatest warmonger. This stark warning highlights the stakes of Trump's folly, urging a rethink before irreversible damage to U.S. interests, regional stability, and global energy markets. Houthi strength and solution. Unmatched resilience. Ritter paints a vivid picture of Houthi toughness, citing a video of a sandal-clad fighter braving gunfire to recover a comrade's body, emblematic of their fearless resolve. He stresses their unbroken record against Saudi and U.S. forces, arguing they are the toughest people in the world on their turf, a fact Trump fails to grasp. This resilience, forged through years of conflict, suggests that military pressure alone cannot subdue them, challenging the efficacy of current U.S. strategy. Tribal identity. He defines the Houthis as a family-led Shia tribe native to the Arabian Peninsula, with territory straddling Yemen and Saudi Arabia. Their insular nature and fierce loyalty, honed by decades of outsider treatment, fuel their tenacity, making them a formidable foe underestimated by Western powers. This cultural and historical depth, Ritter argues, explains their ability to resist overwhelming odds, a factor ignored in U.S. policy calculations. Indigenous capabilities. Ritter challenges the narrative of Houthi reliance on Iran, citing their own ballistic missile production and Western-trained engineers who've crafted hypersonic weapons. While acknowledging some Iranian aid, e.g., guidance components, he compares this to U.S. arms support globally, arguing the Houthi sophistication, evidenced by Yemen supplying Iraq with missiles, demands respect, not denigration. This capability undermines claims of their dependency, suggesting a more autonomous and potent adversary than U.S. leaders acknowledge. Diplomatic alternative: Ritter proposes a straightforward fix: send Steve Witkoff to force Netanyahu to lift the Gaza blockade, a move that previously halted Houthi attacks when humanitarian goods flowed. He lambasts Trump's inability to see this link, suggesting physical pressure on Netanyahu if needed, as it's a low-cost, proven solution compared to endless bombing, a failure of either courage or intellect. This alternative, Ritter contends, could neutralize the conflict's root cause, exposing the bombing campaign as an unnecessary and costly overreach. Houthi retaliation and policy reflection. Defiant counterstrike: Ritter confirms the Houthis' retaliatory strike on the USS Harry Truman with 18 ballistic and cruise missiles plus a drone, a qualitative operation post-US airstrikes. Though thwarted by carrier defenses, it signals their unrelenting defiance, a pattern Ritter predicts will persist, exposing US vulnerability. This action reinforces their capacity to strike back, challenging the notion that airstrikes deter them and highlighting the limits of US military dominance in this theater. Arrogance and ignorance: he attributes US policy to arrogance, believing America can dictate outcomes, compounded by ignorance of the Houthis' legitimate stance, defending Gaza from genocide. Ritter contrasts the billions spent on unwinnable bombing with the trivial cost of a call or flight to Netanyahu, a disparity highlighting American hubris over pragmatism. This critique suggests a failure to learn from past interventions, risking a repeat of strategic missteps like Desert Storm. Lost communication: Ritter mourns the sanctions-driven closure of his dialogue with a Yemeni Ministry of Defense spokesperson, a channel that offered mutual understanding. He argues this leaves the U.S. reliant on biased, incomplete data from Rubio or Trump circle, not the Houthis' perspective, undermining informed decision-making, a critical loss for a nation needing all facts to navigate this quagmire. This loss, he warns, blinds the U.S. to alternative paths, entrenching a cycle of escalation. Implication for policy: Ritter's takeaway is a damning indictment: bombing the Houthis risks billions, civilian deaths, and failure, all avoidable by addressing Gaza's crisis. The Houthis' recent resumption of attacks, triggered by Israel's blockade violations, proves this link, yet Trump's team, lacking Ritter's or Crook's insight, opts for escalation over dialogue, a choice that could define his presidency's legacy as one of reckless ruin. This suggests a broader policy failure, prioritizing force over understanding, with potentially devastating consequences. Conclusion. The Judging Freedom episode with ScottRitter presents a provocative critique of the Trump administration's foreign policy, particularly its military escalation against the Houthis in Yemen, alongside briefer analyses of US-Russia diplomacy and Israeli instability. Ritter's arguments are grounded in historical knowledge and first-hand experience, offering a compelling case that bombing the Houthis is militarily ineffective, morally problematic, and economically risky, while advocating diplomacy, specifically addressing Israel's Gaza blockade, as a viable alternative. His insights into Russia's patience and Israel's fractures add depth, though they rely on unverified claims, e.g., the Witkoff story, and speculative escalations, e.g., war with Iran, which temper their authority. From an unbiased perspective, Ritter's analysis is persuasive for its detail and alternative perspective but lacks balance. He heavily criticizes Trump and U.S. policy without equally exploring potential justifications, such as security threats from Houthi attacks on shipping or strategic imperatives in countering Iran, leaving the viewer with a one-sided narrative. The absence of counterarguments or official U.S. rationales limits its objectivity, though it effectively challenges mainstream assumptions. For viewers, its value lies in sparking critical thought about U.S. interventionism, but its conclusions should be weighed against additional sources to assess the full picture. Ultimately, it's a thought-provoking contribution to 2025's foreign policy debate, best appreciated as a starting point rather than a definitive judgment.